Hello, and good morning to those of you who are on the West Coast. Those of you who are in the middle of the country, maybe still in the morning time, but those of you on the East Coast are definitely in afternoon now. So let's chat. So today I want to go over and discuss positive trauma. We've been discussing resilience for the last several weeks. We talked about burnout. Interestingly enough, burnout is an actual medical diagnosis. It's a diagnostic code for insurance companies. So when something has a diagnostic code, that the conventional medical community is really starting to see it as something that they need to start naming. So there's a collection of symptoms that have started, and they want to name it something because they can start getting paid for doing things that have to do with people in a stage of burnout. So burnout is when you start to see more fatigue. You can't get up over on colds. You're struggling with waking up with energy, even if you've had a full night's sleep. This is when you see a lot of hormone imbalance, thyroid issues, adrenal dysfunction, unexplained pain, even explained pain. This is when you really start to see a lot of these collection of symptoms coming together. And then there's medications, of course, that when they have a medical diagnosis or something, they start attributing to it. You see a lot of increase in anxiety, depression, apathy, and people really struggling. Women, especially between the ages of about 35 and 60, tend to struggle with burnout the most because we are also up against shifts in our hormones, men as well, but women are hitting a really big shift in phase of our lives. So you're getting the stress that you've been building over the years now coupled with your system learning how to now move into a new phase. And that phase, perimenopause, can actually last up to 20 years sometimes for people. So a lot of people don't realize even in their 30s, they're starting to get some signs of perimenopause, premenopausal symptoms. So we've been talking a lot about resilience, and that's the body's ability to take on a challenge, physical, mental, or emotional, and be able to bounce back from that challenge. A lot of us, when we start sliding more into burnout, we're taking on more of that stress load or that toxic load. We can't bounce back. We can't utilize the resilience that we once had because there's just too much to come back from because we're pushing too hard. So I want to talk about one of the things that we see very frequently with a lot of our clients who are struggling in this space, and it's something called positive trauma. We talked a lot about this. There's a whole section of our book that I talked about positive trauma, but I want to discuss it here. So if you really want to, grab the book, it's absolutely go to Amazon. You can grab it and get the Amazon link at nourish123.com/th if you want to get all of the things. But let's even discuss what positive trauma is. Because it seems counterintuitive, right? It seems contradictory. Positive trauma, because most people think, oh, trauma, dun, 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 dun. This terrible thing happened to me. But I want you to think about things that you might be reinforcing in your system that you misinterpreted as a good thing when your body is actually being sent into a space of panic or fear or fight or flight. So anything that puts us into that fight or flight response may be coming from a trauma experience that we experienced potentially years and decades ago. Whenever the body thinks it's in danger, no matter how you interpret the moment, when the body decides, hey, we might be in danger, we have to shoot into this fight or flight, get ourselves ready to run from this danger or fight the danger, that is a trauma moment, right? And it can be logged into your system as something that we always have to be on alert for. So let me give you an example of something that we see frequently. Actually, I've experienced myself personally, and something that we see typically with more strong women who pride themselves on how much they can get done, women who are higher achievers, women who take on all the things, women who are the ones you go to when you have a problem, you need something fixed, done. They're the multitaskers. They're the ones that are managing the kids, managing the household, managing the job, managing their people, all of the things. So we see this a lot for those people, for those types of women, the A-type personalities, the ones who like to get things right, the ones who often identify as perfectionists. So we see positive trauma in this way. So So let me tell you, I'll tell you a story about myself. So as a kid, I remember at 4 years old, I remember this like it happened yesterday, being outside on the front lawn with my dad. And my father's family was very big on boys being more important. And so we kind of got that message really early on from kind of the whole side of my dad's family, that boys were kind of more important, girls were kind of second class citizens, we were the weaker sex, we weren't as important. Like we got that message. Nobody sat me down and said that, but there was enough evidence, right, coming from that side of the family. There were more boys on that side of the family too. There were more men, more uncles, all of the things. And I was one of the first girls to be born on that side of the family, very large Irish Catholic family. And so my dad, very much, I think, really from a standpoint of wanting me to be able to make it in a man's world, very much taught me things that men usually get celebrated for. So he really wanted me to be good in sports, and he wanted me to be strong, and he wanted me to learn how to manage my emotions and not be a girly girl. And that was just normal for me, right? So I'm out on the lawn with my dad. I'm 4 years old. He picks up his baseball glove, which is like the size of my head, and he wants me to start learning how to play catch. So I'm 4. He's throwing the softball to me, and the glove is bigger than my body. Like I'm teetering, and I was a tiny kid to start with. So he ends up lopping the ball over to me, and it hits the glove, and it ricochets off the glove, smacks me in the face, splits my lip open, and I'm bleeding all over the place. So my dad scoops me up and he runs into the kitchen with me where my mom's making, I'm sure, some sort of roast, because that's what the Irish do. We make lots of roasts. And my mom looks up and she sees her firstborn bleeding from the face. So she's upset, of course. And she said, "What happened?" And she looks at my father, and my father is beaming from ear to ear. He's so proud. And she's like, "What is wrong with you?" He's like, "Look at her. She's not crying." Now, that message came through loud and clear to me. Daddy's proud of me because I'm not crying. Now, I probably wasn't crying because I had just been smacked in the face with the ball and I was still probably in shock. I was still stunned. But the message rang through. Daddy's proud. You're not showing emotion. You're not crying. You're not doing what most people instinctively would do when they are injured and they are hurt, especially a 4-year-old kid. So then I started becoming alert to the idea of what makes daddy pay attention. Now, we are hardwired to watch what our primary caregivers do to pay attention to us. Like, what is happening around us where we get paid more attention to? Where are we being protected? Where do they notice us? Where are we being seen and heard? Because hardwired into us, if we're not being seen and heard, we're not being paid attention to from the people who are supposed to be caring for us, our chances of survival are lower. So we have to pay attention to what makes other people pay attention to us who are in charge of us. So really early on, especially up to the age of 7, we are constantly watching for what is making people pay attention to us. How are we staying safe? How are we part of the tribe? How are we being accepted? So I got that message. So I started looking for other evidence that was true, that daddy would be more proud of me when I don't show emotion, when I don't cry. And it was very much reinforced that strong people manage, compartmentalize their emotions, right? And there's no reason to cry. And are you bleeding? Are you really hurt? Can you prove it? Like, there was a lot of that. And I'm sure a lot of you can recognize that in your own families, especially as a boy or a girl, watching just kind of the gender split, at least in the generation where I grew up, in the X generation. So you start to look at this now. At the time, I'm looking at this as a positive thing, that I know how to control my emotions. So as I continued to get older, I couldn't wait to tell my dad stories about how maybe I got injured in playing sports, because I was a gymnast and then I was in softball and I was like rough and tumble. And I was the girl who wanted to play the sports with the boys at camp rather than doing the crafts with the girls. Right? So I would play harder. I learned how to play harder. And I remember telling my dad, like, I could win against the boys in certain sports and I was better at this than the boys. And it became this piece of myself that I celebrated. I'm so strong. Look at me. However, that made me also start squashing some of my instinctual components, the pieces that made me who I was, not gender specific, but something that I was, which actually was a sensory being, we all are, and an emotional being. But I learned to suppress the emotion. And I also never really learned how to process the emotion. So I'm not saying we need to be flinging ourselves across people's desks all the time and freaking out and sobbing and all the things. I mean, do you? But there's a difference between governing an emotion for an appropriate response in a moment where you're not going to like scream at your boss, but not processing an emotion is different. Like suppressing that emotion is different than managing the emotion in the moment and then processing it later, right? Squashing it doesn't make it not happen. So I want you to think of an emotion, an emotional response, as a physical thing. So if you thought of it as a physical, tangible thing, and you swallowed that physical, tangible thing, and it went into your body, eventually it would need to come out in some way. Now, because emotions are not tangible, you can't touch them or see them, we think sometimes if we squash them or we shove them down, we suppress them, they get to go away. They don't. They are still in the system and they're in part of the cycle of processing, and then they get stuck in that cycle. So for many of us, what ends up happening over time is when we don't learn to process, or we don't actually take the time to go process that event, that emotional response, and we continue to try and shove it down and suppress it, it comes out in a different way. It has to change form in order for us to be for it to be paid attention to. So this is where you start seeing back pain, migraines, hormone imbalance. You start to see that your cycle is thrown off and it's not a regular cycle. You start to have issues, skin problems, right? You start to see autoimmune conditions start to show up. The body isn't balanced when it's not processing all of the pieces of itself. Emotional, mental, physical, spiritual. If you're not processing and balancing all the pieces, it will come out through another piece. So this is why when we work with clients, we don't just approach the body from a physical standpoint. Just because you have a physical presenting symptom doesn't mean that the root cause is a physical issue. Right? So you have to look at yourself as a whole being, and you want to look at all of the pieces. So if you start looking at your life, what do you celebrate about yourself? I mean, I for years celebrated how strong I was and I could hold my own with the guys, and I was unemotional. That goes right back to a core understanding of when I am like that, I am paid attention to by one of my major primary caregivers. Again, that's hardwired into us. So if you are doing something even today that is putting you in a position where you are out of sync from who you really are, not learning how to process pieces of the situations that you were in, you may be suppressing, and it needs to come out. That suppression needs to come out and present in a different way. Especially if you've done all the right things. You're eating the perfect diet. You've seen all the perfect practitioners. You're eating all their perfect supplements. You're drinking all of the water. You're sleeping when you're supposed to. You're doing all the things. But you still have symptoms that are nagging, or a specific symptom that is nagging, and it's still trying to get your attention. It means there's another root issue that you haven't addressed, and potentially it could be something that you actually are enhancing, celebrating, reinforcing on a regular basis about your identity. So if you had asked me years ago, how I identify, who I am, how I would describe myself, one of the very first words I would have used would have been strong. I celebrated like to superpower level how good of a compartmentalizer I was. And unfortunately, what was happening is I didn't learn how to actually have an emotional response that was balanced. It would come out. Sometimes it would come out in a complete, utter meltdown. Didn't see it coming. Someone would do something that seemed like nothing at the time, but it triggered into a response that I felt weak. I didn't feel strong. I didn't coincide with that identity that I had identified with, that strong identity. And I felt weak. So I would have this triggered emotion where I could become very mean and I could become very loud and angry quickly, which then I just continue to reinforce because strong people sometimes get angry, right? And I just kept reinforcing it. So in my mind, in my thought process, strong people sometimes have to get angry. Sometimes they burst. Really what that was the unprocessed emotional response that I didn't know how to process. So I did a lot of work around that. And we do that kind of work with our clients who come back with these positive pieces. A lot of our clients reinforce and are very, very excited to tell me that they are perfectionists, and that's why some things aren't getting done, because they are spending so much time on this process, this project, or how horrible their husband is because, damn it, he just can't put things in the dishwasher the right way. There's a way to do it, and there's a way to do it. And I hear you. There is a way to load a dishwasher. But if you are reacting like you want to murder someone because they put the cups in wrong, that's not a balanced response, even if you've asked them 600 times to do it the other way. When we lose our minds that way, we freak out. There's usually more to the story. It isn't about the cups and the dishwasher. There's a compilation of things that have kind of built up where that is the last straw that sends you over the edge, but it's a triggered response. Balanced adults don't have triggered responses like that. That doesn't mean you're not human. We all have something, right? But we want to start getting curious. I wonder what's beneath that volcano erupted response. Why am I so angry? Why am I so frustrated? Why is this back pain still there? I'm curious. Because when we look outside of ourselves and we keep blaming the other people, the damn driver that cut us off, the husband that can't put the cups in the dishwasher right, whatever the story is, when we are that angry or that upset or that eruptive about something, there's a deeper core issue. When we have symptoms that no matter what we've done, they don't go away or they get worse, there's more to the story. So if you're in the middle of a process right now where you are white knuckling it around a perfect diet, you're white knuckling it around a protocol, you're white knuckling it around seeing every expert out there, trying to find the solution, and you haven't addressed some underlying core, potentially positive traumas or negative traumas, there's a great opportunity for you to be able to release whatever that back pain is, whatever that frustration is, whatever the anxiety is, whatever the symptom is, that is really just the alert that there's something deeper that hasn't been addressed or processed. Even if you've seen a therapist, you've done talk therapy, you've done 12 steps, whatever it is, it just simply means that your body isn't finding the outlet to release and let go of whatever that piece is. And when we reinforce something that is actually putting us in a position where we have to go into fight or flight, or we're re-traumatizing ourselves by celebrating that part of who we are, the body's just going to stay in this cycle. The body loves patterns. And if we're getting used to shoving down the emotional response, we get used to celebrating that people who are strong or people who are not weaklings who show emotions. Maybe that was just me. And we learn to process, we learn to address, we learn to get curious, we learn to witness, we learn processes and techniques and tools on how to manage that and get to the root of it so that we can dissolve it. A lot of people, the idea of releasing it is more scary because they're so used to feeling it. And that's not a conscious conversation. There's a subconscious conversation when we are so used to having these emotional responses. We're so used to being angry. We're so used to the back pain. We're so used to the symptom. There is a subconscious fight that goes on to not let go of that symptom because it is so familiar. And familiar, as far as the subconscious is concerned, is better than healthy. It is better than happy. The subconscious does not care if you are healthy or happy. It cares that you are following patterns it is familiar with. That's its entire job. Find the patterns, lock them down, keep doing them, because apparently we're safe, which is relative, right? We're safe when we follow these patterns, because at least we know what we're dealing with these patterns. Now, consciously, you may be able to look at it and say, I'm not better off following this pattern over and over and over because it's putting me in a place where I'm angry or I'm frustrated or I am anxious or I have pain or thyroid issues or fatigue, digestive problems. But the conscious brain isn't as strong as the powerful subconscious brain. Think of the powerful subconscious brain as being kind of like the not so smart, but really big, strong part of you. And the conscious brain is more of like the weakling, little, super smart, nerdy side of you. In a physical fight, that conscious brain is going to lose every time. But there are things you can do to help the subconscious feel safer so that it can start letting go of old patterns and start taking in new ones. There's processes, there's tools, we use them all the time with our clients, and some of them work very quickly. Some of them you need the short term, let's feel better for the now, but also the long term, let's get underneath all of this and get rid of it and dissolve it. So if you go back and start thinking, how would I identify with who I am? So if I had to come up with 10 things that I would finish the statement, I am blank. What is the thing that comes next? I am blank. I am strong. I am happy. I am angry. I am scared. I am in pain. I am what? What are the top 10 things that you would say? And then look at some of them and say, okay, now how could that thing be helping me? And then also, how could that thing be a burden? How could being strong be a burden? What does that really mean? Right? How could being in pain actually be a benefit to me? I know that sounds backwards, but the subconscious only does what it thinks will help you. So all of your experiences right now are actually something your subconscious thinks you need in order to find the next level of healing and balance. So if everyone around you is making you crazy, everyone around you right now is there to help you get deeper and get curious about what could possibly be it while you see everyone else is so frustrating. If the pain won't go away, if the digestive issue is still there, if the skin condition is not going away, whatever your symptom or symptoms are, there is a message in it for you if you can get into a space where you become curious and open to an answer that you may not want or you're not ready to see. And it's amazing how easily some of these answers can come when you finally get into a space where you become curious and you're not attacking yourself for not being able to handle it or not being perfect or not putting everyone else's needs before your own. That's another one that we see as far as positive trauma. A lot of people will put themselves to a position of suffering, putting themselves very at the end of the list. Their needs come last, if at all, because part of what they reinforce and they celebrate about who they are, their positive trauma, is that they're taking care of everyone else. Look at me taking care of everyone. And this often happens because children who have parents who are not stable. We have alcoholic parents, parents that are on drugs, parents that are just chaotic. They're not reliable, balanced people themselves. When you start getting used to the chaos, a lot of times children will step up as children to become the adults in the family to try to find some level of balance. So you end up becoming the adult and as a child trying to better the household or balance the household. You end up taking care of younger siblings to try to keep them out of harm's way or to try to keep the parent or the caregiver calm so that they're not getting upset over what's going on with the younger sibling. So now you're putting yourself out there to take care of children when you're a child yourself, taking care of the adults, you're taking care of the children. Maybe your parents celebrated you. Maybe they are balanced people, but they celebrated you so much when you were such a big girl helper to your little brother and sister. Or you were helping an older grandparent who maybe had moved in with your family. But there became a message at some point where you learned to put yourself behind the needs of others. And so what ends up happening over time is, to be seen and heard and paid attention to, we start putting all the other needs of the people around us in front of our own. You may have had a narcissistic parent who that parent can't see outside of themselves or the needs of anyone else's but their own. So you were forced into more of an empathetic stage to try to balance out that narcissistic parent who doesn't know how to empathize or do the things that you would need. They stay in their own stuff. You trying to balance that energy becomes super empathetic, hyper responsible for their needs. And then you don't know how to do anything other than see everybody else's stuff but your own. You take on other people's energy, their needs as yours, their anxiety, their frustration, their anger becomes part of who you are, because you don't even know the difference between their energy and yours. And now you're suffering, but celebrating how much of an empath you are. And I'm not saying being an empath is bad, but I'm saying, is there a way that you're reinforcing something that is putting you in a position of imbalance, that you're actually reinforcing and looking for evidence and patterns so you can continue to participate in that particular type of behavior? Right? So if you get curious and you start looking at, what could I possibly be doing? What perhaps is something that I'm celebrating that may be putting me in a position where I'm more imbalanced and the body is trying to tell me that I need some support and help there. There's other techniques, there's other tools that we work with our clients to start really leaning in and identifying at a deeper level these types of issues. So this gives you at least a little bit of an understanding of, hey, maybe there's an opening to some information that I don't even realize is there. So start giving yourself permission to start getting curious. I wonder how celebrating myself as a strong person or an empathetic person or someone who's an empath or somebody who puts the needs of others before my own, especially if you have a job that celebrates that. So if you're a first responder, if you're in healthcare, if you're a healer, if you're a teacher, if you're someone who your job, you get paid to specifically care for the needs of others, and it starts reinforcing that you need to put yours last on top of how you already feel personally, that may be an indicator. We have a lot of clients who fall into the healers, practitioners, doctors, nurses, nutritionists, teachers, people that are first responders, police officers, things like that, where you're putting yourself in harm's way for someone else. That can set your body into a complete imbalanced system, fight or flight, constantly in a chronic state, and put you in a position where you cannot become more resilient. You cannot bounce back. You are starting to slide and you're starting to struggle in a way your body doesn't have the resources, without moving some of those underlying root emotional connections out of the way and dissolving them. So deep breath. Let's get curious. Let's look and see what's going on there. If you, grab the book. If you don't have a copy already, to nourish123.com/th. You can also, we just put out a new quiz on resilience to see where are you in the resilience scale. You can go to nourish123.com to get that right on the direct website. And what's fabulous about that is once you fill out the quiz, you're going to get your specific measurement. And then on top of it, you'll get access to a video that you can't actually get anywhere else. That's about 28-ish minutes long. That's going to give you even more pitfalls and pieces around those pitfalls that we fall into, especially as women who are higher achievers, who get stuff done, who are A-type personalities, who are, we're badasses. I mean, come on. But there's a whole video that you can watch after that too, if you choose to. But if you're at a point where you're like, hey, I think I want to have a conversation to discuss a process for me, what could that look like? We can have a quick conversation, plot out a strategy on what it would look like for you to start getting the resilience factor back, get away from burnout or out of it completely if you're in it already, or have a conversation about how do I find the healing that I'm really looking for? And if it happens that it looks like a good match for us to work together, we can have that conversation too. But let's at least just have a conversation on what that strategy would look like. And if you're in the right position right now, to start utilizing a specific strategy in order to get that. So you can go to nourish123.com/heal, HEAL, to put yourself on the calendar for one of us, one of the team members here, to jump on a call with you and really strategize that out. All right. Well, you have a good rest of your Monday. Get curious about potentially where is something that you are reinforcing that might actually be an underlying root challenge for your body and stopping you from finding the healing that you want. So have a good rest.